It's part two of lesson 3 of enterprise computing. So we're going to do a few things. We're just going to add some static files to our project. We're going to put it back on Git. We're going to try again to get it to deploy to Azure. And then we're going to walk through the database setup for next week. So should I just have to add one more file here to, or maybe I already have it. I'll just copy those. So in Blackboard, I'm just copying to the week 3 folder. We've got a few assets. We're not using all of these files, but we're going to use some of them. I may have put it in there twice. Oh. So if you go into week 3, there's this file that says music store assets. You can just download that file. So I'm just going to save it. I'm just going to save it outside of my project folder, one level up. And then I'll browse into the folder where I've saved it. So here's my zip file. I'll just extract it here. So it's not inside my project because I don't want to put all this stuff on GitHub. We only need some of these files. So I'm going to go into assets. They actually give us a copy of the database if we want it. I've actually got an SQL script we'll use. So I just want to go inside of content and I want to copy these items. So there's an images subfolder as well as there's a site.css. Now we already have a site.css, but this has more styles in it. So we'll overwrite the one Visual Studio built.
So the site CSS is just custom CSS?
Yeah. So we'll just copy those 2 items from the music store assets from the content. And we can just go into our project and put them in the content folder. So we'll overwrite the existing site.css and we'll add the images folder. So I'll just paste them in here. So we're in our solution folder, in our web project folder, content. You can see the path here in my address bar. And it will ask if I want to replace the existing site.css, which I'll say yes to. So now my content folder looks like this. We've got the 2 Bootstrap files. We have the updated CSS, and we now have an images subfolder. Inside of images, so there's kind of a homepage banner. There's this placeholder for the album covers. So when we display an album, we can show that image. And then there's a logo. We probably won't use the logo in the header. Well, I guess if we do, we're going to have to change the header background because our header is black. Our black logo is not going to show up too clearly. So all of that just goes into the content folder. Now, if we go back to Visual Studio, just close these up. If I expand the content folder, so here's our site.css. So this is a lot longer than the one Visual Studio built. So it's got some more styles here, as you can see. Notice we don't see the images subfolder. So when I look in my Windows directory tree, we have an images subfolder and content. It doesn't show up in Visual Studio. We want to add it into the project. So here's how we do it. We just click the content folder. This little button right now that's turned off, it says show all files. So this will show any files in that directory, whether they're part of our solution or not. So if I click it, notice images shows up, but it's kind of grayed out. That means it exists on the file system, but it's not part of our project. Now, there's kind of some uses to this. If we want to make the images part of our project, and we do, because if the images aren't part of the project, what happens is once we push this to GitHub, that folder won't get included. So when we deploy it, the images won't show up. So to add any new files into the project, I can just right-click it, choose this option, include it in the project. So it will add that folder and all the files inside it to our solution. So just like we can include files in the project, we can also do the reverse. Now this has its use when we're working on something, right? So let's say we're working on 3 new features that we're trying to finish, and we finished the first one, we finished the second one, but we're still working on the third one. The code's partly done, or it has errors we don't have time to fix. But we need to put those first 2 changes online. Well, if we have a file full of errors, our solution won't compile, right? So we can't run it. So I don't want to delete that file because I'm still working on it. But temporarily, if I need to push changes 1 and 2, I could exclude that third file so that my project will successfully compile. I can push those changes live, and then when I want to keep working on the file, I just include it again until my code's done. So we'll commonly do this when we're working on a file, but we want to launch other changes, but we have things that aren't finished yet. We can temporarily exclude them and then include them back in when we're done. So you know what, let's actually change our navbar. Let's go back to our layout. So instead of navbar inverse, which I believe that Bootstrap class gives us a black banner with white links, I think if we use navbar default, we should actually get kind of a light gray navbar with black text instead. So I'm going to change the class on line 12 in my views, shared, and layout. We'll change it to navbar default for a minute. And I'll go back and refresh my browser and see whether the navbar changes from dark to light. And if it does, then we can add that little black logo in. So I just changed the word inverse to default here. It's better. So now we can replace our link, rather than our link saying MVC Music Store. Well, we could actually just we could leave it, but we could also include our little logo beside it that we downloaded. So I'll leave the HTML action link, but beside it, we'll just add a regular image tag. So we'll set the source equal to content. And that's the other reason we include images. By including it, it comes up inside of our path, content, images, logo. Or maybe give it an alt. So we'll still keep our title, but we'll just put our little symbol of the 3 old school vinyl records beside it. But we wouldn't see this if our navbar is black because our image is black. Interesting. Notice where I put it. I think that is because navbar brand aligns left. So that's why that class, it makes our text bigger than the other links, but it aligns it left, which is why it puts the link before. Wonder if we give this one a class of Navbar brand as well, what'll happen? Whether they'll overlap or it'll put our image first. I'll try it and see. There, that's better. So if we assign that class to both, so I won't bother making the logo a link. This can be the link, but at least our logo shows up. So all I did was add what's here. So our work on this project is kind of done for today. We're not going to do any more with our music store today in terms of the web end of things. So I'm going to put my changes up on GitHub. I'm going to try the Azure Portal again.
It worked over great.
Okay, let's see. It does not like me today. Wow. Nothing wants to work here. And notice also our style sheet has changed. We've got orange text on our buttons. We've got this kind of, the background's no longer white completely. So that's from that style sheet we downloaded. So here was the application we created last week, which maybe will load. So notice, because I connected it last week to my GitHub, notice what happened this morning when I made a new commit. I wanted to show this earlier, but the page just hung. So we connected them through continuous deployment last week to my repository. And as soon as I made a new commit this morning, it now activated this morning's version, last week's version. So that does that automatically because it's configured for continuous deployment. So as soon as I make a new commit, as soon as I commit these files, it's going to deactivate this morning's version and show the current one. So if I go to the overview, I should get a link to the site here so we can see it as it is currently. Why it opens it twice in two tabs? Again, probably the same good reason that we have lowercase model m and capital model M, and the same reason why on the Microsoft login screen, as soon as you type in the username, the password box doesn't let you type and it jumps somewhere else. So it should load our changes as of this morning so far, because I haven't committed our latest files, which include the images, the change navigation. Right, so we still have the dark nav bar, no logo, and our store page will look like the same as it did at the end of last week's class in my online version, because I've yet to commit my changes. Right, so this is kind of how we left off last week.
I committed my changes, and it's not bringing the logo forward, it's just bringing the alt tag.
Okay. We better check the git ignore file and make sure git ignore is not ignoring images. That might be the problem. So we better check that out. Doesn't seem to be in here telling us that it would ignore. Ah, did you rebuild? That's why.
But I'm in Azure though.
But when you added the images, did you rebuild? Because until you rebuild, it won't get included. So rebuild and then make it commit. So I haven't committed my changes to Azure yet. So I'm going to build the solution first. Then it should include the images. We'll see. But I think that was the missing step. And had you not mentioned that, Keith, I would have had the exact same issue, but I think this should fix it. So I will show you again how to create the new site if you don't have the site running on Azure. So you just click on New. You choose Web App. Have to give it a unique name. And you can either create a new resource group or use an existing one if you have one. It really doesn't matter for our purposes. You pin to dashboard and create the site. It'll take a minute or so for the site to get created. And then to connect our site to GitHub, we want to go into the deployment options area. So once it's set up, just go back into my, whoops, wrong one. So through deployment options, we have the ability to say we want to deploy from GitHub. We'll have to add our GitHub credentials in here, and then we should see we have to choose which of our GitHub repositories we're connecting to. And you just select your music store repository and click OK, and then it will try to pull your code from GitHub. You can also publish straight to Azure, either by setting up an FTP account here, or you can publish it right through Visual Studio. You can just click on your project and choose Publish. If you're logged into Azure, you can create it, but it's best to go through GitHub. So I have yet to commit my changes to GitHub, so I'm going to go through that process one more time. So I still have I'll just close my command prompt. So in Visual Studio, I've built my solution. It compiled properly. So I'm going to right click my solution and use our new extension to open the command line. So I'm going to open my default command prompt. I'm going to add all the files. So this is now going to include that new images folder in the 3 images. So we got the mock genre model, images, Navbar. Making a note of what things we did in this version. So the images should be here now, Keith, because you can see when I did the commit, it's explicitly telling me these files got added now. I've already set up my remote, so I'm going to push from the origin to the master branch. This should upload my changes to GitHub. And then if we look in the Azure panel in a few seconds, it should automatically pull the new version. So 3 commands: git add dot, git commit -m with the description of what we did, and git push origin master. We don't need to set up the remote or initialize Git. We've already done those things. We only need to do those at the beginning. So if you don't have your stuff on GitHub at all, you need to start with git init. And before you can push, you need to add the remote repository URL. So all of today's files are now on GitHub. Doesn't take very long because I didn't change a lot. So now I've got my end of lesson 3. Inside of content, my images are here. And within a minute, notice, doesn't take long. It already checked, it's found a new commit, and it's already active. So it deactivated what we did at the start of class, and it's saying, here's your active commit. So one of the other nice features of this is we should be able to roll back to an earlier commit. We launch something, we try it in the browser, and we say, oh crap, that bombed. I want to put my old version back online. We have, actually, I'm not sure what. So yeah, here, I can click the version and redeploy from an earlier version. So I can roll back easily if we break something. So here it was as of this morning. But now it's saying our end of lesson 3 version is the active version.
Great. I'm assuming the same thing will happen if you roll it back on GitHub.
Yeah, so. Okay, so. I'm just thinking about how we would do, yes, but I'm thinking about what that process would look like. So we put something. We go back to that earlier, the last version that we know is working. We click it and we redeploy that, right? So we get our site back online without our changes. What I would probably do then, rather than roll back through GitHub, I'd probably just go back here and try to fix my change. And if I couldn't, yeah, then I would revert, or I'd pull, right? Because you can go into any commit. So if this commit broke, I can browse the repository at this point. I can download and try again. Have to think about what that may or may not be the most efficient way of doing it. There's probably a way to just roll it back within Visual Studio. I've never tried doing it that way, but there probably is.
Can you do me a favor? If you go to your Azure release,
Yep.
Like the actual website
Yep.
on Azure, and go to Store, and then click one of the links.
Yeah, I guess I should try that. I'm hoping this says genre 1 to 10. It's a little padding issue with the style sheet. Good point.
But no, can you click one of the links to them?
Yeah, and we should fix this as well. Because it's our content a little too high.
That's what I thought.
It's there, it's hidden.
Oh, okay.
So we need to add a little padding below our header. So the style sheet, I think the original style sheet had it, but we overwrote that style sheet. Here, we can actually check here. I'll look at the old version right before I overwrote it. We can actually go in and see if there was any padding in the header somewhere.
Padding top 50 in the body.
Yeah, so we have the padding. Just trying to think where we want to put it. So let's try that. Yeah, we'll put padding top back in the body. And we can test it locally first. So inside site.css. So yeah, it says 0. So I'll maybe change that to 50 here, and that is a good point. I'm glad you pointed that out, Keith. Let's see if that fixes things. And if so, we'll need to recommit. No, that did not fix. Yes. So by changing the padding in the style sheet from 0, changing the vertical padding to 50 makes that go, it makes the content visible. So we'll change this, and now we need one more commit because we want to push this change again. Go back to my command prompt. Again, add all the files. So we re-added body padding. There's 2 commits that say end of lesson 3. And now we'll just push again. I'm glad you pointed that out. Thank you. I knew in my notes somewhere I made a note that we would need to do that. So it's pushed, and I would expect Azure is going to redeploy again. We'll just give it a minute and it will automatically bring in the new version. If you don't want it to wait, you can click the sync button, but it checks every 60 seconds.
Is there a way to stop an existing build from GitHub to Azure? Because mine seems to take forever.
Well, you can disconnect, so it's not automatic.
Yeah.
The other thing you can do, well, actually, that raises an interesting question. We'll talk about that in a second. So I'll try one more time now. So start of the lesson, end of the lesson. And now with the padding back in with our CSS fix. So just commit your changes and Azure will always give you your current version. Which does bring up kind of an interesting question. If as we're working on stuff every day, we want to commit our changes at the end of the day or when we finish a major change, we want to push that stuff on GitHub. What happens if we're working on a task that's going to take us several days to do? So we don't want to deploy that task until it's finished and tested. Yeah, so in that case, we're really so far only been working with a single branch, right? We're deploying our master branch, but we might want to create a development branch in that case. So all our changes live on the development branch. We can still commit them to GitHub, but when we set up Azure in the options, it asks which branch of this repository do we want. So we can deploy for a master, but we can set up other branches for things that are in progress. Right? Maybe we launch an application and then our customer wants updates. So we might add a new features branch. Or if we're working as a team, it might be each developer gets their own branch. Right? William has one, Alex has one, Keith has one, and then you all work and just publish there, and then someone acts as the code master when you say, hey, I've got this feature finished, and they'll test it and they'll be responsible for pushing it. Last year, I actually talked to the IT staff down in the in e-building. So they're the ones who are using, they're actually using Azure. If you log into the student portal, it runs on Azure, on GitHub for all of the services that they generate. And they have, the way they have it working is every day, someone in the department basically is the GitHub master. Anybody who says I finished a feature, they rotate as to who reviews that feature, and that person for the day is responsible for merging those changes into the master branch, and they use continuous deployment. And I don't know if anybody ever mentioned this to you, but they've said if you ever want to build any kind of student service to run on that, you can publish it to GitHub and they'll integrate it. So you can actually build components, and if you have an idea for something in the student portal you want to see, they'll let you do it. That would be fantastic. Hey, I built part of the Georgian student portal that 11,000 Georgian students have access to. that's something anybody's interested in, maybe in a week or two, I can get somebody from IT to come up and talk to you guys a bit about how you might go about doing that. If you wanted to do it and include it as part of a project for this course, totally fine by me. Right? Build it for me, see if they can include it in the portal. Maybe that's something we can do for assignment 2 in the class. So there's our deployment. So each week, I probably won't deploy anything at the start of next week's class, maybe, but certainly the end of next week, we'll make another commit and Azure will pull it. So our app is always up to date, and we've got this rollback ability, which is nice to have because we do break stuff. Happens, right? Things run locally and they don't run in production, or we think they're running fine. And then like Keith caught the error. He caught my oversight that I didn't bother checking that I messed up with CSS. So go back, redo it. Does anybody have any questions about the GitHub and Azure deployment?
I didn't see that. Azure Portal, I'm assuming you just configure settings, you just pick the GitHub route and put in credentials.
Yep. So first it'll say, where do you want to deploy from? So there's a whole bunch of options like Bitbucket, Dropbox, Team Explorer. So you pick GitHub. It'll ask you to authenticate yourself just once, just when you set it up, then it'll store, and then it'll come up with a little GitHub login saying, do you authorize Azure to access your GitHub account? So you log in, and then I think it will say, choose a project. So you click that, it brings up all your repositories in most recent order. You choose your repository, and it says pick a branch. Well, you will probably only have one branch. You click master, and then it will set it up and deploy.
I can't initialize my GitHub, I can't initialize my GitHub.
Okay, so you reinitialize it with Git in it.
Yeah, but it says Git is not recognized.
Okay, if it says Git is not recognized, then it sounds like Git may not be installed on your machine. So if you don't have it, just search for Git and click on, go to the Git downloads and reinstall it. It's free, it's quick, but you do need Git installed on the machine in order to be able to do it. Other questions? Again, all of this is recorded as well. So it's all on YouTube.
Richard, if you have a sec, could you pull up the layout CSS
Sure.
tab, that image source where we put the logo? I know you changed something to the right, like the Navbar brand, I think.
Yeah,
on the right, or did you remove
I didn't change any. No, I was checking it. That was already here.
Okay.
Visual Studio automatically gives the Navbar brand to that title. I just added that class into the image tag as well because I wanted the image on the left of the text. So what's highlighted in blue, that's all we added here.
Right. Okay. Just wondering if my
Everything to the right of that
the title
is unchanged.
Still like on.
Excuse me.
Up there.
My whole solution is also on GitHub, so if you need to refer to it outside of class or after class, it's there now with all the latest changes. So we're just going to do 2 more things today. We're going to set up our SQL database so we can start connecting to it next week. So I'm going to go through this process twice. First, I'm going to set it up on my local SQL server. Then I'm going to set it up on Azure, and you can use either one. Okay. So if you want to try installing it and running it locally, first thing you need to do is start SQL Server Management Studio. If you don't have it, you can easily search for it and download and install it. So no, doesn't work. This is That's for, Joel, that's only for MySQL databases. So this is a completely different type of database engine. So the tools you have for MySQL will not work. So if you don't have, if you do a search on your machine and you don't have Management Studio, you can go and grab it online. Just do a search for Management Studio. And you can download this latest version. You can't download the upgrade package if you don't have the initial program installed. So you don't need the upgrade package, just this one. SQL Server Management Studio 17.2. If you have an older version, that's fine. I'm running version, I have 2014, it works fine. So this is like MySQL Workbench, but much, much better. And it's for SQL Server databases rather than MySQL databases. So this has many more features. It's far more robust than Workbench. So when you open it up, it brings you to a login screen that looks like this. If you want to use a local database, you basically have two options for the server name. You can either try, which usually works, just in brackets, the word local, or you can use your computer name. Now, when you set it up, by default, I think the default option for local is just to use Windows authentication. So it's probably, you probably have it set like this. So if this is the case, that's all you need to do. You can click connect. Chose not to authenticate with Windows, which I don't. You have to pick SQL Server authentication. The default user account, the login is always SA, which stands for system admin. And then whatever password you would have entered at the time you installed the server. If you just accept all the defaults, then you're using Windows authentication. And it's a good idea if you are using SQL Server, click remember password, because then it stores the credential, and every time you open the program, you have to keep entering their password. It caches it. So you just click connect. So up here under registered servers, this shows you all of the servers that you have databases on and where you've stored credentials for. So these are, I have a whole bunch of stuff on Azure. I've got a bunch of different clients and hosting companies. So here with this host, I've got a bunch of different databases. So all these credentials are stored. So if I want to run queries or manage those databases, I can just go in here. I can run a query anywhere here. So here's I'm connected right now to my local server. So I want to go in here and set up a new database. So this is the one I set up yesterday. I'll set up a new one for today. So it's easy as right-click database, choose new database, give it a name. Done. You have a blank database. Oh, this one, COMP2007. First thing. It creates two physical files in our SQL Server directory. The data file itself has an MDF extension, Microsoft data file. It also creates a log file with an LDF extension.
Rich?
Yep.
Quick question. So can I have a database on my PC and run it into Azure and basically run my website off it?
No, because the Azure web server has no way to access your local database. You can do it the opposite way. You can set the database up on Azure that allows remote access, so we can run our web application on localhost. That's probably what I'm going to do, but I'll use the Azure database. But you can't do it the opposite way. The Azure web server has no access. If you gave it access to your SQL Server, Joel, you're basically giving the internet access to your SQL Server. You're making it public, which we don't really want to do. So all you have to do is enter a database name. And here we go. We have a empty database with no tables in it. Now, one of the neat things, I'm not going to use it, I'm just going to show it to you. There is a visual table designer in here. So I can do this. If I want to create a new table, rather than typing the SQL script, I can just do it this way. Create the column names, not null, primary key, save, it'll prompt me for a table name. So I don't need to write a create table script and deal with my SQL syntax errors. I can just do it through here. I can set up default values, whether it allows nulls, whether to automatically assign an ID, whether to index the column. You just do it all visually. It saves a lot of time. Actually, I'll just show you the Wednesday database. We'll do it in a minute. We can do diagramming right from in here. We can create relationships. We can also write complex queries. So if I want to do a query, rather than write all my SQL commands, I can create it as a view. And there's like a visual query editor. So here, show me all the genres, artists, albums. I'll just add those tables. They're already joined. If I want to change those relationships, like, hey, show me any genres, even if there's no albums. I can just write an outer join. It rewrites the SQL. And hey, let's just run the query. Oh, here, so show me the genre name, album title, price, and artist name. Right? If I want to sort by title, if I want to filter, sort this descending. Who's got time to write SQL queries, right? Right. So this is why, Joel, you're at question, can I use Workbench? Well, you don't want to use Workbench. You want to use this, right? It's a lot better. Now, we don't.
2 semesters to just go forget it.
Well, see, we got to teach you what you're doing before we give you the tools, right? We got to make you do all this stuff manually. Otherwise, this stuff doesn't make any sense. But so, for example, I'll often have a customer, like I have a customer who regularly will ask me for like usage reports on his site. So in order to generate that report, I've got to join about 6 or 7 tables together. So I've written the query here. I can save it as a view. And I typically I can put in criteria. So, he wants like a quarterly report. So I can just change, the date. So I don't have to go back. I can just go in here anytime I want, run the report. I can grab these results. I can just copy them, paste them in an Excel spreadsheet. Here you go. Here's your result. If he ever wants to pay me to build a page, I could do it. But if he just wants a quick and dirty report, I can use this query builder. So I can save this view if I want. So if I save it, give it a name, call it, catalog. So now I can come back here anytime. Actually, I'm not sure it's saved. Yeah, so here's my view. So I can just run it, or if I want to change something, I can just design it, but I can execute it. So it's like a way of us being able to store those queries. Now, when we're using ASP.NET MVC, we don't have to write SQL queries in our code, but when we did, this was great. Use Management Studio to write the queries, and then go and copy and paste those into your application code, which was awesome. We didn't have to spend time writing those. So this is just one of the many features. We can also import data right from here. So this, for example, we're working on a local database. Now we want to put it on a server. I can export the data here. So I can export it to a CSV, to a text file, or we can import, right? Someone gives us a CSV and we want to bring that data in. We can import or export. So if I want to export this to any of these, Excel, Access. So if I want to export it to another SQL server, it says, okay, just what are the credentials for that SQL server? And then we'll say, what objects do you want to export? Click the tables, click the views, and it'll copy them to another server. So this is how we could move data around from one machine to another. There's tons and tons of neat features in here. So we want to set up our database here. We're not going to use the visual query editor. I've put an SQL script on Blackboard that we can just run, and it'll populate the database. So go into week 2. I thought we might do it last week, so it's in the week 2 folder. Here's an SQL script that will create and populate 5 tables and build relationships between them. So just save this file. Again, we can save it outside of the project directory. It doesn't need to go up on GitHub. So the same place maybe you save those assets. We'll just save it here. And then we can just open the file in Management Studio, run the script. So if we just click on File and choose the Open File method, pick the SQL Azure Music Store Create script, and open it up. So here's all our create and insert. Now, it's selected on my other database. I want to pick my Thursday database. So the database I just set up. So make sure whatever you called your new database, that's what's selected here. Because this is indicating which database we're running this SQL command inside of. So then just click execute. And actually, I'm going to turn one other thing on. I'm going to click this button. It's an option, but I'll show you why it's neat. So I'll click this include execution plan. And then I just click execute. So it'll run the script. It'll give me any feedback here for every record I try to insert or any error messages that occur. Those will appear here in the messages tab. Shouldn't take too long.
What if we have a database with like 2,000 lines?
Then it'll take a little longer. So as you can see, it's inserting stuff. Hasn't given me any errors yet.
How many lines is that one?
It's not that big. I'm surprised it hasn't finished by now, actually, to be honest with you. But here's this other cool thing. I turned on the execution plan. This shows us the performance hit for every piece of our SQL. So this is great when we're running complicated queries and we're finding bottlenecks in our application. You can run those queries here, and it shows you for every part of a command, what percentage of the resources is it taking. So we can identify places where we might be able to optimize our SQL. So here's the query cost that shows you. I don't know why it's taking so long. Yesterday, in yesterday's class, it was like 10 seconds and it was done. We'll just wait till it finishes. There, finally done. So down here under my tables, they don't show up yet. But if I just click the refresh icon on my database and expand tables, there we go. So there are 6 tables, and we can just check the data right here. Okay, so our database is populated now on our local server. I'm going to go through the same process again. I now want to I'm going to set a database up on Azure. So if we're not running locally, we want to have it running on Azure so that we can publish our web application and can talk to the database. We need to set up a database there. We also get the code hinting in here. Okay, so album dot. Again, if you got to write queries and you want to type them yourself, we get code hints. This is also not case sensitive because it's running on Windows, right? So when you run MySQL Workbench, things are case sensitive. These are not. So you're going to type your commands all uppercase or all lowercase, doesn't matter. So here's how we do it on Azure. Just in the Azure panel, we'll choose SQL databases. So here's mine from yesterday. I'll add a new one. You don't have any, so you probably have a big blue button here that allows you to create one down here, or you can click the add button. They give us 32 megs per database with our Imagine subscription. So not huge, but big enough for what we need to do. So you have to give it a name. Now it's important. So we're basically setting up our own database name, our own server, and our own username and password. So whenever you do this, you need to put this information in a file because you're going to need those credentials in order to let your web application talk to it. If you set it up today and you forget those credentials next week, you have to basically delete the database, start all over again. So here's what I typically do. And create database. I'll use my Thursday resource group. Again, it doesn't matter if you create a new resource group or use an existing one. I'll set it up as a blank database. And where it's saying configure the required settings, this is where it wants us to create a server name, username, and password. So I'll click this. So I already have a server from yesterday's class. I'll create a new one for today. I think create new is your only option. So it'll be something.database.windows.net. So I'll just use the same name. Set up credential, and then I'm going to put these credentials in a file. Otherwise, I'm not going to remember them. The location doesn't really matter, but I may as well use the closest data center, which I think is Canada Central. And we want to allow Azure services to access the server, because otherwise our web application won't have access. So I'm going to create a text file and put it in my folder with these credentials. This is what I do anytime I create any sort of accounts. When I create FTP accounts or database, I always want to put those in a file somewhere and make sure that file doesn't get pushed to GitHub. A new text file. I'll save this one. Where my solution is, I usually just call it access.txt. So my database name will be this. My server name's here. You can screenshot it, but it won't include your password. Yeah, I'm publishing my password to YouTube. I'm sure nobody's going to abuse that. So I'll just confirm everything here. I'll pin it to the dashboard. Oh, I may have to pick another location. It only lets me put one server per location, and I used Canada Central yesterday. So I'll pick Canada East. I'll pin it to my dashboard for easy access. It does take a couple minutes for them to set this up, so we can see the deployments in progress. We won't really do much else with the database in the portal. We use Management Studio to do all of our management and to work with the database. There's not really much of an interface here if we want to like run queries or look at the database. It just gives us like usage reporting, etc. here. So what I'm going to do, once this is done, I'm going to connect from Management Studio to our new Azure database. And actually, there's one other thing we need to do with it. Well, we may need to do. Let's see. So what I want to do here, I'm going to go back to Management Studio while that chugs away. What I want to do is add my Azure database in here and store my credential. So if I want to connect to it, I can just open the program, click the connection, and log into it. I don't want to have to authenticate every time. So in here, you probably have this. You don't have this little Azure group. So I've kind of grouped my stuff by client or by server, but you will see local server group, I think. And if you expand it, it will at least have your computer name or your local server if you have one set up. So you can right-click your local server groups and choose New Server Registration. Because I like my stuff organized, I'm going to put it inside of this little subgroup I called Azure. You don't need that. I just have lots of SQL Server I'm connecting to. So I'm going to right-click that option and choose New Server Registration. You can just click the option above, the local server group. Choose New Server Registration. This is where you need the name of the server you just set up. So here's my server name. We paste that in. It automatically copies it down here. This registered server name, that's more of like a friendly name. So I'll just change it to something friendlier. So I know which server this is. And then we have to change the authentication method. We're not using Windows authentication here. To authenticate, we need a username and password. So the credential we just created in the Azure portal needs to go here. Be sure to click remember, otherwise every time you try and connect, it's going to prompt you for the password. If you remember it, Management Studio will store your password. Let's go back here. Okay, database is set up. That's good. So I'm going to see if we can now connect from our local Management Studio to the new Azure database we just built. So we'll test it. Okay. So it did try to connect. What happened? In plain English, why did we get the error? Second sentence kind of tells you the problem. By default, when you create an SQL server on Azure, it doesn't allow remote access, right? It will only allow local access for security. To enable access, use the Azure portal or run this procedure to create a firewall rule for this IP or a range of IPs. So we could allow the college IP, but that means if I go home, I get the error again. So what I probably want to do, because this is not a production level database, in the Azure portal, we have this link here that says set firewall. So just click on that. And we can create a rule and set up an allowed range of IPs. So you can set up multiple subsets. I'm going to allow everything. So I'll just create a rule called all that covers all IPv4 ranges. Because I want to be able to work both here, when I'm at home, wherever I am. I want to be able to fire up Management Studio and get into my database. Now, this isn't necessarily a great idea for a production application. Most of my production applications, basically I allow two IPs, the college IP and my home. So I explicitly have that IP as both the start and the end. So I have two rules, one called work, one called home, and those are the only two IP addresses that have remote access. If I'm not there, I can't get in. So then you can just save. If you click add client IP, that adds just our IP here at the college. But again, as soon as you leave the college, you won't have access. So we'll save that rule. So now we've got an open firewall. And in my experience, different hosting companies handle this differently. Some hosting companies, as soon as you set a database up, as long as you have the credential, you can get in regardless of IP. Others are more restrictive, and some of them won't allow any remote access at all. They want you to, VPN in, for example, use RBDP to connect, which is more secure, but it's tough as a developer. So if I say okay and test this again, now we can connect. So setting that IP rule was critical. So now I'll just save the connection and it adds it. It added, for me, under my Azure group. For you, it should add the server underneath your local server group. So here was my Wednesday and here's my Thursday. So now we want to connect to it so that we can run the script again and build out the data, build out the tables on the Azure server. So what we can do here, so I'll just maybe right click and connect the Object Explorer. Actually, no, sorry. I'm going to close Management Studio and show you how we connect to it from nothing. So we've saved that connection. So now I probably have two connections. I have local and I have my Azure connection. Just close all this stuff up for a minute and I'll open it back up. You don't have to close yours. So now that it's here, I'll just cancel the login box and I can just go here and browse and I can just double click my Thursday server and it will connect it down below. So here's the database we just set up in the Azure portal, but it's blank. So now we just want to run that same SQL script and it will populate our Azure database. So we have two options. We could run the script, or I could do an import from my local, and it will copy everything in the local to the Azure database. I'll just do file. And actually, I can just go to recent files. It's right here, if we already had it open. I'll just open it back up. But now, and notice it defaults connects to my master database. We don't want it running in the master database. We want it running in the one we created explicitly, whatever you called it in the portal, and we'll execute it again. Probably will run a little more slowly because it's not just working on our local machines, it's running over the internet, running this SQL script. Wow, it actually ran faster. It's already done. 6 seconds versus like 45. So now if I refresh, we now have all the same stuff right here. Right? So I've got two copies. I've got a local copy. I've got a cloud copy on Azure. So we probably won't use Management Studio a lot. But if we want to be able to look into the database, if we want to modify it in any way, we'll just go in here and do it. I think next week, one thing we'll do is just, I'll show you a quick video that kind of talks about some of the other features and some of the other power of what SQL Server offers. And this is the default choice for, and has been forever, for ASP.NET applications, whether they're MVC, Core, or something else. This is the standard backend. We could use something else, but very rarely will we see .NET applications with something else on the back end. This is what we can usually expect to see. Okay. So our database is set up. So next week, what we're going to do is we'll set up a connection. And this is even easier. If you think about in your PHP class, let me just close this. Think about how many times I made you type the PHP connection string if you were in my class, over and over again until about week 6 or week 8. Now here, you can actually just go right here and say, hey, show me the connection string. Well, here it is for our .NET app, or if you wanted your PHP version, there it is. It's even easier. We don't even have to copy or paste it because we're going to use Visual Studio. We're going to use this little tool called the Server Explorer right here. So we'll actually connect it right up here, and Visual Studio will just write the connection string into our web.config for us. We'll never have to write it. So it's going to replace the one that appears. This is just connecting to a local MDF file. So we're going to overwrite that with a connection string that looks like this one, but we don't have to hand code it. That'll all get automated. Then we're going to use the database first model. We're going to blow away our album and genre models we built today. We're going to use the entity framework tool, and it will auto-generate 6 models based on the 6 tables we've got. Only typed objects that map exactly to our tables. No work on our part. Click, click, click. And then we're going to start working with the real data rather than the mock data we were working with today. Okay, so that's next week. I'm also going to give you assignment 1. I'll give that to you next week. Okay. We do have a lab for this week. Okay. Here's the lab. It's not due until Monday night, which is plenty of time. So you have to make a new solution, just call it lab 1. I want you to go into the, just accept all the defaults, use the MVC template. I want you to go into your site template, make a couple of HTML changes, change the title, change the header in the navbar, add your name and student number in the footer section. Right? That just shows me that yes, you understand how the templating system works, the layout templating system works. You have to make one controller, and inside of there, Visual Studio will automatically generate an index method, and your index method needs to return that list of products, just a hard-coded list. You can use the view bag, or you could make a fake model the way we did today. However you want to do it, both are okay. We're just hard-coding the data. But it has to be sent from the controller to the view. And then create a details, much like we did with our genre, where the user clicks one and it passes that name along to the next page. We're really just replicating what we've done in class. I want to see that you're able to kind of, what we've done so far, you've understood enough that you can go ahead and do that. So I've said use ViewBag. If you want to do it the way we did today without ViewBag, that's fine as well. Up to you. Create a repository with that name. It should be private. Make sure you invite me. Okay, you can find my GitHub username. Right here. Right, there's the link to my GitHub page, so you can just grab the username. So create a repository, make sure it has the right git ignore so it's not pushing your packages and all the other stuff we don't want to GitHub. Try and deploy it to Azure if you can. So you really need to submit two things. Just give me a link to the repository and a link to the site running on Azure. Okay. So you have until Monday night, which is plenty of time. Everything we've done in classes on YouTube. So if you're a bit behind, you've missed a few classes, you should be able to catch up. All of my code in my repository is up to date. So everything we've done in class is here for you to reference. But I want you to create your own solution. Look at mine as a reference. Don't download it and change it. Okay, because then I'm kind of marking work that's part mine. That's not the idea, right? I want you to go through the process feeling comfortable. Yes, I know how to set up a solution and get it online. Okay. I don't have official office hours Monday, but I am on campus most of the day. So you have until Monday at midnight. If you need help Monday, send me an email over the weekend and we'll set up a time on Monday to meet. And I'll be around most of the day. Okay. Anybody have any questions about the lab? All right, you're free. Have a good weekend. I'll see you next week.